Good morning, everyone. New buyer representation agreements are transforming how agents and clients approach the home buying process here in New York City real estate. These contracts outline the agent's role, compensation, and fiduciary responsibilities to the buyer, fostering greater transparency and accountability. Following recent industry changes, including the NAR settlement, these agreements prioritize commission disclosure and address potential conflicts of interest. For buyers, this shift is intended to provide dedicated, tailored representation, though opinions may vary on its effectiveness, while agents benefit from clearer expectations and stronger client relationships. Overall, this change promotes professionalism and a more balanced dynamic in the real estate market. We'll be diving into this topic and so much more as the show kicks off this morning. But first, let me welcome my listeners and viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. I am Vince Rocco, and this is Talking New York Real Estate. Grab your coffee, settle in, as we go behind the headlines and discover the real story. This is the state of our industry. And in the news this morning, last week, the City Council voted to approve City of Yes for housing opportunity, marking the most significant update to the zoning resolution since 1961. This ambitious initiative aims to unlock housing production citywide by expanding office to residential conversions, increasing density, and establishing a new affordable housing framework through the universal affordability preference. The plan also eliminates costly parking mandates and creates opportunities for housing development in low-density neighborhoods. REBNY President Jim Whalen expressed strong support, stating that this move is a critical step forward, a sentiment he shared with the broker community. However, the pushback from advocacy groups have raised significant concerns, arguing that the city faces not a housing shortage, but a shortage of affordable housing. Critics argue that these changes could exacerbate the problem by adding units that cater primarily to wealthiest New Yorkers and out-of-state buyers, while sidelining those in need of affordable options. Additional criticism includes encouraging the demolition of existing affordable housing, following other cities' examples where increased market rate housing often fails to reduce prices universally. Instead, the least expensive housing becomes more costly, leaving vulnerable populations worse off. Concerns that neighborhoods targeted for upzoning often become less racially diverse, with shifts toward higher income, dominantly white residents. These points have fueled skepticism about REBNY's enthusiastic endorsement, prompting many to question whose interests are truly being served. And as that debate unfolds, the implications of City of Yes will undoubtedly shape the future of New York's housing landscape. We will have more on this in an upcoming episode and as the story develops. And with me at the table today is Jared Anton, Managing Director of Elegran Forbes Global Properties, Brad Jacobs from Offit Kerman Law, and Molly Townsend, Townsend Coaching and Consulting. And they join me now.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. As an official moving partner of Brown Harris Stevens, we know that your clients deserve more than just a move. At Roadway Moving and Storage, we turn moving into an experience they will love. From specialized services to a white glove treatment, we've got it all covered. When you choose Roadway, you're choosing a peace of mind for your clients. Plus, our referral program is the most rewarding in the industry. Want to learn more? Shoot me an email at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We are back. So starting January 13th, REBNY, or the Real Estate Board of New York, will require all agents in this town to start using buyer representation agreements. This came out of the NAR, National Association of Realtors, settlement way back in, I think, August already, or maybe June or July of this year. I can't remember, or it seems like it's been forever, where commissions have been a big question. So we're going to get into that topic today with some of the experts here at the table. But just remember, we are still status quo for another couple of weeks. January 13th of 2025 is when that agreement will kick in for us. They're key to transparency and to better client services, but the industry needs more education on what these agreements are and how we are to use them. So, Jared, of course, I want to start with you. I read something you posted recently that at a recent Street Easy event, you heard firsthand that there's a lot of confusion, there's a lack of training, and just complete misunderstanding of what this actually is. So if you can explain it to our listeners and viewers, I'd appreciate it this morning.
Happy to, and thanks for having me here, Vince. This is obviously an important topic, a topic that I'm passionate, so I'm assuming that's going to come through in my voice here in the next hour. But I do want to back up and just say that many brokerages in Manhattan or in New York City actually needed to abide by the use of a buyer broker agreement starting back in August, because many firms that are active in our marketplace either were a released party under the NAR settlement or had their own settlement with NAR. What's coming up for the January 13th is that there are other members that are part of REBNY that were either not named in another lawsuit or were not otherwise engaged in it, that weren't bound to have to abide by these terms because they weren't part of the lawsuit to begin with. But as REBNY is finalizing their settlement as part of the lawsuits, that's where the requirement of this is coming down to play. So over the last 6 to 8 months, there's been a little bit of an unequal requirement across different firms, and that has only added to the confusion. But speaking to the Scruti's event or some other industry experience, there is even confusion amongst firms that are required to already use this amongst different agents. And the reality is everything boils down to clear transparency. I'm on record back in March when this was first proposed to, speak to my agents and to anyone that I came across and said, very frankly, if you can't stand in front of the mirror or stand in front of someone else and say, here's my value, here's what I'm worth, and here's what I charge, if you can't do that confidently, then I've told my agents you can click that little red button or walk out the room and please go find another job. So very simply, if someone cannot communicate why they're worth it, this is not the right industry. So part of the use of this agreement that excites me the most is, quite frankly, the fact that it forces our agents to stop being lazy, to stop being able to say, well, hey, my service is free. It's fundamentally not. Even though the buyer may not be directly paying it, it's not free. And it's going to require the agents to do better. And part of the reason that we don't have the best reputation is because we have low barriers to entry and the ability to make a lot of money. So what I've been calling for is this flight to quality. And I think that this is going to be another thing that will accentuate or excel that flight to quality.
You so well said, 100%. I totally agree with you. I've gone on record before saying I don't agree with any of this nonsense. I think it's nonsense, in generally speaking. But let me ask you, though, because you said that you've been talking to your agents since the early part of the year and trying to get them to understand what their value is, okay? Understand that if you're talking to people, if you're going to be representing someone to buy millions of dollars in real estate, you've got to know or show them that you know what you're talking about. But what are the, specific responsibilities of an agent that come with this agreement? So explain some of the components and we all know it's commission-based, but what else? As I said at the top of the show, our buyer-agent relationship should be made stronger. How does this help that happen?
Absolutely. So just to back up one sec to come full circle for the question. So there's generally two schools of thoughts with agents when they're working with a new buyer. There's one school of thought where I'm going to set the appointment, meet the buyer at the appointment, or maybe 15 minutes before, and have that conversation, right? I don't like that approach. There's another school of thought where you have what I like to call a buyer-broker consultation. And this is where you're going to have a meeting or a phone call, call it 15 or 20 minutes, where you're going to explain who you are, what your services are, how you operate, and understand what the buyer is looking for. Quite frankly, there's many agents that try to just go out and meet the agent or meet the client right away at the first showing. And this is part of the reason that many listing agents would say, I knew you got that person from a lead, right? And the fact that an agent's getting a client from a lead is not the issue. The issue is when a buyer's agent is not properly communicating to a buyer who they are and how they work, right? So I'm of the school that I like to train and teach and do myself to have this consultation with the buyer before I ever take them out. And the way that Elegant has designed our buyer-broker agreement, because keep in mind, REBNY is not giving out an agreement. REBNY is taking the stance that will give you a checklist that if you put all these things together, it does form an agreement. There are other entities like New York State Association of Realtors or HCAR that have put out more comprehensive templates, but Elegant has prepared ours with our attorney, as have many other firms. But we've designed our agreement to be able to exactly facilitate or follow the pattern of how that buyer broker should go. Introducing who you are, introducing what you're going to do, what your roles are, what the buyer's roles are, what the buyer's looking for, and then how much you get paid. So very simply, I also like to communicate and help to articulate that there is a difference between what an agent's true value is and what a buyer perceives their value to be. Many times a buyer perceives that 40 to 50% of our value is just finding them the homes and touring them around. That's fundamentally not true, because buyers can find the properties themselves. That's not the hard part. The hard part is making sense of it, right? Understanding the good, bad, the ugly. The hard part is getting access to the property. The hard part is understanding where do I put in an offer and not getting taken advantage of. So I like to reframe and say, look, I'm a partner with you in the identification of properties, right? I want you to be an equal participant. And I've had clients that say, never send me a listing. I'm going to send you all the ones I like. And others have said, send me everything and anywhere in between. But the agreement really helps us boil down, what are we going to do? How do we come alongside them as an advisor to go beyond just the property identification, but to talk through all the potential pitfalls, all the ways that we'll be able to save them time, money, stress during that process. And that's what's really important, is it helps us to better position, better reframe how they're going to experience the buying process. It gives us the ability to introduce members of our team, including our board package support team, because that's so important, so that they understand holistically who we have on our team and what we're going to be able to do to get them in their home, again, in the shortest amount of time for the best deal with the least inconvenience of their life.
As for these agreements, though, are there minimum terms, and can they be terminated at any point? I mean, we are now being asked to provide an agreement to a buyer prior to working. Can they expire? Do they expire? Can they be canceled? What are the terms?
So
typically,
Elegant is not mandating specific terms. We've created an exclusive version and a non-exclusive version. Simply put, the exclusive version would cover every property within the parameters defined that consumer is looking for within a defined time period. And a non-exclusive would only cover listed properties, or those properties that we show a client. Simply put, a client can't have more than one exclusive signed, but they could have multiple non-exclusive signed as long as they don't have another exclusive signed.
We're going to talk about that in a minute, because that's pretty key. Molly, your thoughts on this, and what, in your opinion, should be the structure of an agent's compensation when it comes to putting these agreements together?
Sure. Let me just give you some context.
Sure.
And the audience some context. So I am 20 years in the business, but I left brokerage this summer to start a coaching and consulting business, because I see the massive need there is in New York City for good coaching and consulting. And being brokerage agnostic now, which is a really awesome, unique place to be, I've seen how inconsistent and bad the communication and training has been. And
on this issue,
yeah. Yes. I mean, it varies wildly from brokerage to brokerage, and from office to office too. So to the extent that you have a culture of participation, like Jared enjoys at Elegant, all the agents are in the conversation. To the extent that you have a culture of non-participation, agents are pretty clueless. And what I am seeing, and now I'm putting on my coach hat, is managers across the city being relatively flippant. This is an easy thing to adopt. You guys, come on, this is a changing industry, as you always say, Vince. Why can't you just wrap your head around this? It's not that different. What they're not addressing, and this is what really concerns me, is the elephant in the room, which is this a viable career anymore, right? We have downward pressure on commission. We have these multiple class action suits. Now we have the FAIR Act. People are scared. And that's what the conversations I'm having behind closed doors is not, I don't understand this agreement and how to use it. It's what's happening to the future of the industry.
Very true, but you can be scared, and I know a lot of folks are. But is it hesitation to really kind of wrap their head around what this really means? Or is it kind of a non-interest? All of the above? Or it's just like, okay, it's new. And what do I always say, right? The only consistency in real estate is change. Whether we like it or not, change happens all the time. These changes are significant and really not cool. How do we get agents to understand, okay, let's now get over it, move on, adopt these agreements, and do what we have to do?
Yeah.
And prove and negotiate and talk to our clients. Jared made a great point. It's about you and your professionalism with your clients. If you can't, I agree with you, if you can't convince someone that you're not worthy to work with them, then you should find that red button, whatever you said, and go work somewhere else. Red button, right? Okay, whatever.
Well, to some extent, it's generational. At least this has been my experience, right? So
Well,
you have
yes.
the veteran agents who actually, when it comes down to it, can easily justify their value and have that conversation with their clients. They just don't like the paperwork, right? It's like
Well.
it's interrupting their process. And so that freaks them out. And then the younger agents for whom like this isn't such a big deal because they haven't been set in their ways for so many years and they understand it fundamentally that it is important to disclose who you're working for, right? And that it is important to justify your value from the very get-go.
But it's difficult when in theory, when we now have to potentially ask a buyer to pay our commission because the seller says, oh, I don't have to pay a commission anymore, or all I have to do is pay a commission to you, my listing agent. So therefore, the buyer agent is on their own. So sometimes that'll happen, sometimes it won't. In my world, it's happened twice. And then in other conversations, it's 6%, usual. But when when a seller says, I'm not paying the buyer's commission, and then you have to go to a buyer or a buyer calls and says, hey, I want to see that listing because I saw it on Street Easy, and the seller isn't paying a commission. So in your agreement, how do you position that? What do you say to that buyer? I can show you this. However, are you going to pay my commission, or what amount are you going to pay me?
So there's two pieces here. So one is I want to say that, again, we are in this period of transition. And, decades ago, it wasn't 100% the norm that a agent would have a seller sign a listing agreement, right? An exclusive right to sell. So it's important that we don't forget that at some point in time, having a seller sign an exclusive right to sell and agree to pay a commission was a new thing. So I think in a year from now, we'll look back and be, how did we ever work with buyers, invest a ton of hours, a ton of time, a ton of emotional energy without a signed agreement, right? No one would go, in fact, Rebney won't let you, put a listing on the market without a signed agreement. So an agent has been comfortable for decades now asking a seller to pay. I don't believe that for a similar service, it should be that difficult for a buyer's agent to do the same. Number two, based upon my analysis, we're not fundamentally seeing over the last 5 or 6 months any inherent material change in the percentage of properties that are offering a commission to a buyer's agent, nor have we seen any meaningful reduction in the average commission offered. So fundamentally, the belief that sellers are going to en masse not offer a commission or offer a different commission fundamentally have not, at least not yet, materialized. And keep in mind, all else equal, price and commission equalize. Because again, if a buyer is going to have to come out of pocket to pay a certain commission, the price would need to be correspondingly less. And an agent can, with their client's express permission, negotiate commission as part of the offer with price. So for instance, to your question, Vince, if there was a property hypothetically listed for $1 million and this property was not offering a buyer's commission, or maybe was offering 1%, and that agent had a signed commission agreement at 3%, right? That buyer would be on the hook for 2%. If there was another property that was asking, let's call it $1,025,000, but that one was offering to pay 3% to a buyer's agent, you see how these things are roughly the same because the buyer may basically offer slightly more for that $1 million property and ask that they pay a certain commission to their agent as a way of rolling that commission into the purchase price. So everything is going to equalize, and therefore a seller that is or is not offering a commission would need to be advised accordingly by their real estate agent. Again, I recognize I'm putting a lot of trust in the seller's agents here, but I do generally have high hopes and expectations for our industry. You're going to see how those things will relatively normalize.
All right, we got to take a break. We're coming right back. A lot more on this topic. Don't go anywhere. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. We'll be right back.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
All right, we're back. Here we go. So, Brad, from a legal perspective, what are your thoughts listening to these guys this morning here at the table with regard to buyer representation agreements? Have you heard of or seen any or had to get involved in any disputes where these agreements have been signed, almost signed, whatever?
Sure. So I have not yet been in any disputes. I think it's a little early for that to come up. I know it will. When I represent sellers, oftentimes a client will reach out to me and say, hey, I got this listing agreement. Can you take a look at it? Give me your thoughts, have some comments. I'm assuming that over the next couple of weeks, as I represent buyers, this is going to also happen is have buyers reach out to their attorneys to say, hey, I have this listing agreement. I need you to take a look at it. Is there anything in here that you're concerned? And one of the, I guess, the dilemmas with that is oftentimes a buyer, even though I always encourage them to have an attorney lined up before they go into the process, may not have an attorney yet. So, and they get recommendations from the broker, and the broker says, well, you got to sign my agreement in the interim. So that's something that's going to come up. Have not had any, like I said, disputes just yet, but I have had deals already where buyers are paying the broker's commission. And what it's done to me is it's forced me to look now at the standard clauses in contracts that deal with brokerage commissions. Right. Generally speaking, contracts will have a clause that says, the brokers listed on the first page of the contract are the only brokers that are involved, that the seller is paying the brokerage commission vis-a-vis a separate agreement. And we just kind of take it for what it is. Now, that's going to change, and that has changed, where there's a shift.
And in the buyer's agreement, you've got to be specific about the amount.
Yep.
It's got to be easily verifiable and not open-ended.
Absolutely. So I have had deals in the last couple of weeks where we've had to modify that clause, put it into the rider, make it clear that buyer under a separate agreement is paying X percent of commission. So absolutely, that's coming into play, and that's just going to be the kind of the new norm. Now, like anything, and you alluded to it too, in a year from now, we may be looking back at this and say, you know what, maybe this isn't so bad. This wasn't so insane as we thought in terms of all the paperwork, but it's something that we all are forced to kind of shift our approach to transactions.
A thought occurs to me, Jared, because I'm sure this is going to run the gamut, with numbers and what's the right percentage that a buyer should pay the buyer's agent, et cetera. So, and I haven't gotten an answer yet here from my company, but a buyer says, okay, Vince, I'll sign your buyer agreement. I'll give you 1% of the sale price, okay, if we decide to buy this apartment or whatever. Now, I can tell you 1%. Now, I bring it back to my company and I get my split out of 1%. Not good enough. How have you guys thought about what that bar should be with buyer percentage or choice of percentage? I mean, 1%. I'm working for 6 or 7%. 0.6 or 0.7. Right. Why?
Well, so...
and if it's a co-op with the board package and everything else, no, not going to do it.
Well, the very important thing is there is no standard commission. Commission's not set by law or any organization.
It's always been that way, though.
It's always been that way. So every agent needs to be able to understand, what is right for where they are and in their business, right? I can envision how this gives way to a greater diversity of potential business models, maybe not necessarily in New York City, but certainly in some of the more cookie-cutter national markets where, here's a menu of services, right? And there's been some memes about this. It's $50 for me to book the appointment. It's $150 for me to unlock the door. It's $250 for me to turn on the lights. I'm being a little bit illustrative, but you get the point. So again, what I coach my agents to is what is the value of your time? And I would rather you position yourself to work with fewer but more high quality clients, those that are going to be able to have the effect of referring you business, being your raving fans, and looking at this along every interaction is an investment of time that you must make and a certain opportunity cost. And I like to be able to put it back on the client when I speak. How can you expect me to invest time in my clients if they're not equally invested backing me? Right? As a business owner, and this is the most important distinction that real estate agents need to make for themselves right now. Are you a salesperson or are you a business owner? If you look at yourself as a salesperson, I'm here to tell you that you have the completely wrong mindset for you to ever be successful in this business.
Never.
Period. Right? you need to be a business owner. And as part of a business owner, everything you do, every client, every piece of marketing, every interaction, every email you send, every contact is a step along you getting to your journey. So if you're not grounded in what your business plan is, if you're not grounded in how you're going to get to your goals, whether that be a 6-month, year, or 3-year goal, you're not approaching this business from the right way. So this gives us all the ability to sort of take a step back and to reset and look at what type of business leader do we want to be and what type of business are we creating? And then how do we go and create a pricing model or pricing strategy that attracts the type of clients that we want to be able to work with?
And I mean, Molly, this guy is right on the money here. So
He always is.
I know he is. That's why he's always here. But in your consulting business, to some of Jarrett's points, though, how are you getting agents to understand what he just said? You are a business owner. You're not a salesperson. I mean, I heard that from my first sales manager here 22 years ago. You're a marketing person. You're a business owner. You're not a salesperson.
You're the CEO.
You're the CEO of your own business,
Yes.
right? Your own little candy store, I call it.
Yes.
So how do you get agents in your consulting business to understand that and to work towards that end?
It's hard because unless agents have been in the business a long time, it's hard to go from an employee mindset to an employer or business owner. So one of the things that I do is really work on their mindset, their leadership skills, look at what they're investing their time in, and help them zoom out. So much of what I do is help people zoom out because I say in the world of real estate, what agents struggle with the most is developing business, so business development while transacting at the same time. I equate it to rubbing your belly and tapping your head. It's just very difficult for people to do.
Absolutely.
So my job as their coach is to constantly help them zoom out so that they know where to spend their time in a worthwhile way with the highest ROI, as Jared was saying.
And I was going to jump in too. As the lawyer on a transaction, I get made fun of a little bit because I oftentimes will send emails to everybody in the deal and say, hey, team, all right? I look at real estate as a team effort. Every person, whether you're the broker, the banker, the managing agent, everybody plays a very vital, important role in any transaction. And if one person is not, fulfilling their obligations and taking the role as serious as you need to be, it throws off everything. Real estate, I see family law and commercial litigation on my law firm, and everyone wants to kill each other and they hate each other. Real estate, for all intents and purposes, everyone has a goal. All right, you want to buy the real estate.
It's the same goal.
It's
right?
the same goal.
Yeah.
Everyone, for all intents and purposes, are in line with what they want to do. And to what you're saying is, if you're going into it just looking at it in a kind of tunnel vision and not realizing what you need to do to make your client, get the best value and the best deal, why are you doing this? It's just totally ridiculous.
And I can attest to, the value that Molly brings to, her clients, because it is not the norm in our industry to have that coaching, to have that mindset. And what's so important and what Molly does is we have such a local market that if you go to the national coaching, a lot of their recommendations don't work here.
Yeah.
You're not going to go door knock, right? So it's important to be able to zoom out. It's important to be able to understand, especially in this time of transition, how do I pivot? Because in any moment of transition is when there's opportunity for new leaders to emerge, when there's opportunity to take market share. And truly, when you're going to have teams or individuals that have a lot of business, they're going to keep doing well in this time because referrals are going to be even more important. And not that lead generation becomes less important. It just becomes a little bit more difficult to be able to build that relationship on the onset. So you need to be a little bit smarter, a little bit sharper, and a little bit, better to the trigger to be able to make it work. And that's where the value of being able to zoom out and understand exactly how to position yourself and articulate your value is going to be so important as you find your niche.
Molly, so a buyer asks, does the agreement include, and we touched on a little bit before, exclusivity, and can I work with multiple agents? Because, the buyer mindset out there, I know we like to think not, but the buyer, mindset out there is I'm going to search on my own, Street Easy is helping me, and I want to go to open house on my own, and, maybe I'll, deal with an agent if I need to, but I really want to kind of save, money on the price, which is always their mindset. Long story short, Can they sign multiple agreements to work with multiple agents? I think Jared alluded to it before, a non-exclusive agreement. But what's the point, right? We want exclusivity if we're going to be doing this as agent and buyer.
Well, imagine this, Vince, right? So I'm a relatively new agent. I haven't built my book of business, my sphere of influence. I'm building expert leads from my team lead, and that's going to be my foundation, right? So I'm meeting, as Jared alluded to earlier, I'm meeting my potential client on the corner or at a Starbucks 15 minutes before the appointment. There's not an easy conversation to have with someone you have absolutely no rapport with to say, sign this exclusive agreement, right? So I think what agents are finding to be successful is the non-exclusive, which is property specific. So I'm going to show you this unit today, and it could be that the exclusive expires in 48 hours. It could be just say yes to me for the weekend. We'll date for the weekend, and if it all works out, great. Then we can consider signing a more exclusive agreement.
Which leads me to open house. Like, a lot of times buyers just show up at open house.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're working with agents, sometimes they're not. Most often they're not. Do we need to have them sign a buyer representation agreement at that open house prior to showing them that apartment or not?
So if Redney just put out some guidance on this, if you're the seller, right, you're working with a disclosed agency relationship for the seller, if an unrepresented buyer comes into your listing, you do not need to have them sign the buyer rep agreement because fundamentally they are an unrepresented buyer and you're representing the seller. Now, if you were to strike up a conversation with that buyer, you found out that they weren't interested for whatever reason in the property that you were representing, and you offered to send them other listings and take them out to see other things, at that point you're converting that prospect to a potential buyer of yours, and before you show them other properties, you would need to have them sign an agreement.
All right, so buyer asks, what happens if I have an agreement, I'm signed with an agreement, but I find a property on my own? I went to an open house, because we know buyers do that, right? They're working with you, and all of a sudden they go out and do their own thing. And I really like it, and I really want to buy it, and I really want to, whatever. What says you?
Hire me as your agent. I'll negotiate the best terms and make sure you have a seamless
But you already
close.
have the agreement with that buyer, right? Mm-hmm. So their thinking is they can go out on their own and find something and potentially put an offer in. We know they can't. But can they?
Well, they can if they've signed a non-exclusive and it's property specific.
Exclusive.
Oh, exclusive.
Then technically, as long as it meets the criteria that was bound on the agreement, then that buyer is on the hook for that commission.
Mr. Attorney,
Because
there's a conflict. How do we settle that?
well, let me
Because we know buyers will be buyers.
Right. Buyers will be buyers, sellers will be sellers. There is, at least from some of the agreements that I've seen already, is language with the exclusivity that says if you find anything, you have to refer it back to us, the broker. So hopefully that gives the buyer a little bit of pause to avoid any potential conflicts. But, like anything, there's always the possibility that they go out and say, you know what, forget this broker. I'm going on my own. Again, that'll be a wait and see type approach. And if there is a conflict, that's where lawyers come in and, we'll look at the agreement to see specifically how it relates to conflicts of interest. But like, as I said from the initially, is the agreements do have language that basically obligate the buyer to,
New developments
Yes.
or buyer agreements. We talked about it a little offline here. Buyer agreements necessary for new development purchases?
That question,
They are.
They're right. So we were kind of talking, during the break about new developments, and sometimes a buyer will come in and, maybe I've represented other buyers in that new development, and I know in other deals what sponsors may or may not be given. Buyers comes in without a broker, has no idea what may or may not be given by the in terms of concessions. That becomes an issue of, if you had your buyer's broker in the first place, they would know what type of concessions are given. So that's something that becomes relevant. And, any scenario, whether it's resale, new development, or what, having that buyer's broker is just so important because it'll give you the insight and the guidance that, you don't know, especially a first-time buyer. It's one thing when you
Well, that's what I'm thinking about, first-time buyers, yeah.
It's one thing when you've bought and
don't know
sold
anything.
multiple properties in New York. All right, you have at least some experience of how it works. When I represent first-time buyers, especially first-time buyers that maybe own in California or Florida, and they come to New York and they're thinking, oh my God, like I cannot believe how much extra work there is. Just, you need somebody to be able to convey that messaging to them.
Jared, what disclosures, if any, are required to ensure compliance with any industry standards or not?
Yeah, so when you're working with the buyer, you already need to give them the agency disclosure form as well as the fair housing disclosure form. So you're adding into that packet now your buyer representation agreement, and they're all together. We have them very simply through our eSig platform, or it can be used, if you're with them in person. But one thing that is really important to clarify is that compensation, right? And Vince, you touched on this earlier, that it needs to be, clearly discernible, meaning that you cannot say the commission is whatever the seller is offering or up to a certain percent. It needs to be a defined and finite value, whether that's a dollar figure of $10,000 or a certain percentage of, 25%, whatever the percent or fixed dollar amount is. You also, very importantly, cannot get commission from any source above what is written out on that agreement. So, for instance, let's say that you have a 3% commission agreement on that buyer rep agreement that's signed, and you take them to a new dev, for instance, that may be offering 4%. You cannot legally accept 4% commission, right? That extra percent would need to go back to the buyer or otherwise renegotiate it or have a different agreement drafted. But without any other modification to the signed agreement initially, you cannot legally accept any commission above that, which does throw into question back in the new dev side, what is going to happen there? Developers have been largely giving 4, 5, in some cases 6% commission to a buyer agent as a way of enticing brokers to bring buyers there. And arguably the prices are inflated because of that. So, does the sponsor say, hey, we're going to drop the price a little bit and normalize our commission? Or do they keep it where it is and try to do more of a pass-through? So that's one thing that I'm watching very closely to see what sponsors do, and does that change the commission that they're offering given this?
And I had one last point is, sometimes it's not as much, but, sometimes you'll see seller concessions. A co-op wants a price at X, but the apartment is really owned Y, so you have to have an inflated purchase price with a concession. How is that going to impact, is the price going to be based on the contracted price, or is it going to be based on the net price? So that's something that I think is going to come into play as well on these things.
Molly, oftentimes I kind of fantasize about getting back into agent sales management, okay, which is part of my past in this industry, 22 years. Now I say no, okay, because it seems to me like there's a lot going on. He manages agents, and I know you did. Probably not, okay? However,
I got out at the right time.
You got out at the right time. However, strategies, though, when you're, again, coaching and counseling agents, and Jared touched on it beautifully earlier, the strategies of saying, hey, this is my value, this is what I do. Are they concerned with how they should be talking? I always say negotiation in this business is everything. Everything, or every time we talk to somebody, it's a negotiation, right? So how are we getting them past that fear, right, of having to negotiate or explain who you are and what your value is?
There are scripts, right? And I feel like everyone has role play and trainings right now across the city. But again, this is me as the coach. If fundamentally you don't believe you're worth it, then the best script in the world is not going to help you, right? So that's the work that I do, is getting to that.
A little bit of an ego needed. Right?
Of course.
I mean, you have to believe that you're worth it,
right,
and you can't fake it. It will come across so clearly if you're inauthentic.
Authenticity.
Yes.
As I teach in school all the time. Only way to be.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take another break. We're coming right back after these messages. Don't go away.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business. And it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Okay, we are back. So I want to ask about the buyer agreements that we have to sign. Do we have to show them to the listing agent prior to making an appointment or showing up to show an apartment, or is that something that we do between buyer and buyer agent and not with the listing agent? That question has come up to me several times. I think I know the answer, but give us the answer.
Yeah, very important question. And REBNY has as well put out guidance. For anyone that doesn't know, REBNY released a whole FAQ on these buyer agreements. It's on their website. I just refreshed my memory of it this morning as well. But very clearly, no is the answer. No, the buyer rep agreement is not to be asked for by a listing agent, nor should it be sent from a buyer's agent to a listing agent. A listing agent may ask to confirm that an agreement has been signed. So they can go, hey, Molly, just want to make sure you've signed a buyer rep agreement per the requirements. Molly can respond yes or no. But I can't ask Molly to send me the agreement, right? So that's really, really important. But it would come up and you would see it arguably on the deal sheet as well, because you're going to see, instead of it just showing the commission, you're going to have a different annotation now, because for buyer and for seller's agent, it'll show a certain percentage. And then you also need to now write who's it coming from or who's paying it. So,
and that's got to be written, of course, into the agreement.
Exactly.
Vis-a-vis a modification to the existing clause about broker agreements, or, adding it to the rider that kind of, will modify what the printed contract says. Yep.
Correct.
Molly, we were talking during the commercial break, and I think it's important, so I want you to bring it up again. The lack of understanding of the agency that we all kind of, work with in our industry. I teach it in school, and people sometimes, and I teach continuing ed, so it's 2 years as an agent plus, okay? And they look at me like, what did you say? And I think, okay, got it.
I read, I think it was an Inman piece, someone referred to a simple explanation in talking to a buyer or for an agent to make the distinction is to just go back to their training, which is understanding the difference between a customer and a client. And I thought, oh, no, because most people don't understand that.
Correct.
And I think
I don't know why, but you're very correct.
And we've been doing this, you said 15 years?
At least. Maybe 16.
And it's still very difficult. It's difficult to train. It's difficult for, I used to manage veteran agents who didn't get it, but they weren't willing to admit that they didn't get it. So it was a constant struggle. And I think that's going to cause a lot of chaos early on in Q1 with open houses, because they're not being trained properly and they just freeze at the mention of agency.
I think we need to start serving jalapeno martinis at open houses. Come on January 13th, because you are so correct. I think it's going to be a free-for-all. I don't understand. But let me ask you, Jared, we're talking about the buyer representation agreements. This all stemmed from the National Association of Realtor, NAR's, settlement suit back in March?
Yeah.
Okay. Give us a high level, the viewers and the listeners, a high level of what that whole thing was about and why we are now here needing to conform to that.
Yeah, so
even though we don't use MLS.
The super condensed version is that it was a argument that it violated antitrust and price fixing and forced sellers to, quote unquote, unknowingly, pay a commission to a buyer's agent. So basically the whole thing is about, sellers had to pay inflated commissions because they were compensating a buyer's agent, and why should they be paying, the party that's representing their adversary, right? And I take issue with a few parts of that. One, and we touched on this before with Brad, it's not an adversary, it's a counterparty, right? Fundamentally, a buyer and a seller are not adversaries because they want the same thing.
Right.
And the two brokers are not adversaries. Yes, they're representing counterparties with different interests. One wants to get the most money, one wants to pay the least, but generally they both want the house, right? One to buy, one to sell. So It's not an adversarial relationship, and I do not like working with brokers that take the tack that it's an adversarial relationship because it makes it friggin' painful, right? It's about how do we work together to achieve the goals? How do we make this as clear and smooth as possible? So all of this came out of basically making it clear that we can't talk about a buyer representation as being free because fundamentally it's not. Even in the case of where the buyer is not paying it, arguably they are paying it vis-a-vis the sale price, right? So there is no such thing as a free lunch. It's not allowing brokers to skirt it under the radar. And more importantly, we've deconflicted or decoupled, so to speak, on the listing side, what the commission is, right? Before you would go in and you would ask for a certain percentage, and that would be arguably split equally between a buyer and seller unless there was some other agreement. And now as a seller's agent, you're going in and saying, hey, my fee is this. And you have the option to offer a buyer's agent, and you can choose to offer something, nothing, or anything. And a listing agent may be giving some recommendations as to what may be appropriate to position the home and to accomplish the seller's goal. But it's helping to give arguably more pricing power for a listing agent to be able to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. These are the expenses I'm going to incur, and this is how I'm going to go. So all of this boils down to trying to understand how commission is derived, who pays what, and creating clarity for it.
All right. So we talk about commission transparency between the agent and the buyer. You come to some kind of a term, hopefully. What happens if you can't come to terms? What happens then between that agent and that buyer? We can't agree on a commission amount paid, or the buyer says, I don't want to pay you a commission. I mean, the quick answer is we don't work with the buyer.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. How often do you think that's going to happen, though?
Well,
I mean, I'm always looking for the whatever light at the end of the tunnel, and I say, well, maybe not, maybe 50% of the time, but I'm not so sure about that.
I don't think it will happen that often. I like to believe that we live in a little bubble in New York City.
Yes.
And that
You think? Big bubble.
But we are, just by the co-op inventory alone, protected and simplified in expressing the value of a buyer's agent. Yeah. It's hard to navigate a purchase in New York City.
Look, I talk about it hold one second. I talk about it all the time when I'm teaching. We here in New York City, the way we transact real estate is so far more complicated than anywhere else in the world. Anywhere else in the country. 30 miles out on Long Island, Westchester, New Jersey. I mean, it's unbelievable what we do. So that's why I said earlier, if you get the new rules, kind of put that into an already complicated and difficult transaction of real estate. I'm sorry, Brian.
No. I mean, you were basically just said what I was going to say, which is real estate in general is not a one-size-fits-all approach. New York City is its own, you say the bubble, an island, however you want to refer it as, so Vince, to your question of you're going to see buyers say, I'm not willing to sign this agreement, maybe somebody that's gone through 2, 3, or 4 transactions before, maybe a little bit more savvy, willing to kind of go on their own. First-time buyers, I don't think you're going to have that problem at all. And I think they're going to realize when your first conversation with a broker is, hey, without me, you're not getting through the board. You're not getting your board approval. It's a ton of work that goes into that.
Well, ideally, I agree with you, but I think it's also going to be based on price point. I mean, if somebody's out there, looking at 4, 5, $10 million apartment, you can put anything you want in front of them, they're probably going to sign it, okay? Because it doesn't really mean that much to them. If you're talking to a first-time buyer who's going to spend in this town at least $1 million or very close to it for their first-time purchase, and we all know how buyers are, they don't want to spend their bar mitzvah money, their community money. Oh my God, I'm going to be broke. I'm going to be poor. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, you're buying an asset, okay? And if you need to sell it at some point, you sell it. But that's not the mindset of what goes on in their head. But now you have to ask them to pay 1 to 3% in a buyer's commission.
What?
You add that percentage on to their closing cost. Yeah. What's the answer going to be? No.
But it's all about the presentation. So you're asking them, but it also is important for the market education that still largely they're not coming out of pocket with that. And we see this nationally,
Well,
with the early data. So this is where that conversation comes, and they can, you're supposed to, as the agent, disclose before you ever show them the property, what, if any, commission is being offered. So before you ever walk them through the door, they're going to know if I have to come out of pocket or not, and where do we go. It's also important to ground the buyer broker in two things. One is, even before the NAR settlement, 8 states, Colorado was one of them, you needed to, by state law, have a buyer's broker agreement in place. So this is not entirely new. It is certainly new in our market. But for those agents that came up through the ranks of tenant rep, right, and Molly, you're going to know this, it was fairly common that as an agent representing tenants, you had the tenant sign a fee agreement, right, which is fundamentally no different than now having, buyers sign a buyer rep agreement. So I sort of laugh internally at a number of the agents that I've coached over my 15 years that started in rentals that say, hey, I hate talking to a renter to have them sign a fee agreement. I want to get into sales. Well, joke's on you because it's come back around. So don't forget that little red button if you haven't gotten over that yet.
I love
But you
that
know
red
what's going to
button.
happen? You know what's going to happen, Jared? It's certainly not at Elegran or Brown Harris Stevens, but you're going to have the agents who, just like they used to slip in the fee agreement at lease signing, they're going to slip in that buyer's agreement, at contract signing. You're going to have to deal with this, unfortunately, Brad.
For sure.
And just like on a hope and a prayer, right? Oh, I'll work with this person for 6 months because I have no one else. They're not committed to me. They haven't signed anything. And maybe, just maybe, if I'm lucky, they'll sign a contract and I'll get paid. I think we'll see.
I want to go back to what we talked about earlier, and I know that it's not part of this topic. We're going to talk about the FAIR Act in January, but back to your point earlier, Molly, with fear or lack of understanding on the broker side. I agree. I also think that there's a little bit of anguish going on where commissions in general, I think you alluded to this earlier, where commissions in general are concerned.
Yeah.
They want to take away our rental commissions. They want to take away our buyer commissions. It's like, okay, so if I'm not a listing agent, and fortunately I do more listings than I do buyer or renter, but if I'm not a listing agent, how am I going to continue to work in this industry? In New York City, in this bubble that we talked about, I don't necessarily have answers for people.
It's very anxiety producing.
So I think there's anguish and anxiety more than, the fear we can kind of put aside a little bit maybe, but they don't get it. It's like, why is everybody putting their hand in my pocket? What do we say to that?
Like 95% of transactions still involve buyer agents here, right? So buyers will continue to buy. They're going to be represented by a broker. So back to, how Molly coaches the agents, you can either get in the boat or get out of the boat. The boat's moving. So, which side do you want to be?
Correct.
We can throw our hands up all day and whine and complain, which, is cathartic to a certain point. But otherwise, how are you going to level up, change your game and adapt and get ahead? And this creates this opportunity for you, to jump 3 to 5 spaces ahead in the leaderboard just by getting it and changing it better than someone else can.
But even just to zoom out even further, because I have deep empathy. You have agents coming off of COVID whiplash, right? So they had 2 or 3 years of making money hand over fist. Right? It was
Not this past year, but yes.
Not this past year,
Correct.
arguably not 2023. So they went from like high volume, biggest years of their careers to a very difficult, slow-ish market, right? And then layer on top of that all of these new regulations, lawsuits, the FAIR Act. It's dizzying, to say the least.
It is. And like I alluded to before, agents, tell me between, the interest rates being higher than they've been in many, many, many years, stopped buyers from buying. Inventory is very depleted because sellers say, I can't sell. I've got a 4% interest rate. I'm not paying 7%.
Yeah, the lockup effect.
Correct. So, and then the FAIR Act, and then, the NAR settlement. So agents are out there saying, hey, what is this? Or what am I going to do about this? More importantly, how do I get through, push forward, and just do it. Get on that boat, as he said, and just sail with everybody else, or sit back and say, hey, this is way above my pay grade. I don't know how to do it. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. I know, Brad, you said earlier that you haven't had any conflict yet, but what recourses are buyers and agents going to have at some point when I believe there's going to be some kind of, controversy, some kind of disagreement, some kind of whatever? I mean, are the, like listing agreements, we always say, especially in school, listing agreements signed by sellers, they're not really contracts. You can tear them up in a minute. You can get out of it before the 6-month term or 4-month, whatever it is. Boom, you're done. I don't like you. You don't like me. Mutually, we're going to go our separate way. Right. So they're not really a contract. What about this? Is this really a contract?
And that was one of my notes that I had written, before this was, the term is super important. The geographic scope, super important. In the city, most brokers generally kind of have a feel on the city as a whole. Let's take the suburbs, Westchester County, where I live, where we talked about before. You go from town A to town B to town C. Every market is different. Every industry is different. So you're going to have that become a little bit more of a problem. In the city, brokers generally do have a better feel on the whole as a whole. But I think what's important with these agreements is where we're going to get involved as the attorneys is making sure that the buyer are fully aware of the scope of the agreement and the term of the agreement in terms of what it's going to cover so that you can avoid these problems.
Molly, last thoughts on where this is all heading, where we are and where we're heading, in your opinion.
I think agents need to make a decision, whether they're on the boat or off the boat. And
whether to push that red button.
And whether to push that red button or not. If you make a decision, then that's half the battle. If you don't make a decision, then you're just going to be fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting.
Exactly. Jared, close us out.
Well, I think the light is at the end of the tunnel. I've gone on record in the last 30 days that for the first time in a decade, I'm bullish on Manhattan real estate. I wrote a whole insights report. Manhattan has had basically 3% appreciation since the start of 2017, where the national market is up 50 to 70% or more. Markets in Miami and Tampa are up well over 100 to 110%. And those markets are in bubble risk, and they're seeing prices fall. And New York City moves counter-cyclical to many other markets. So I do believe that we are bound to break out of our 8-year price ceiling right now. We're already seeing us in the last 2 months exit the low volume trap of the last 2 years or 2.5 years. And November, based upon a contract volume in Manhattan, was the third best November in the last 10 Novembers. So there is an increase in activity. There is increased certainty in the fact that the election is behind us. There's increased certainty in the fact that mortgage rates are stabilizing. So rates are not going to drop as quickly or as drastically as I had previously called for, and they're going to stabilize. And that stabilization is actually better than anything else because it creates certainty, and that certainty is the grease that the wheels need to move. So I really call on our industry here to implore where we're and embrace where we're going, use these agreements in the intention that they're meant to be, and please don't try to make the agreements to skip through the loopholes or try to get around it. Like if what you're trying to put in the agreement is trying to circumvent the purpose of it, it's wrong. And please don't try to do that. It's not good for you. It's not good for the client. And it's certainly not good for the industry. So I ask our industry to embrace what is here, to respect and have appreciation for the opportunities that we have before us, and to just do right by the client. And I do believe that this spring we will have an increase in transaction volume, a more liquid and robust market, and that will start moving prices higher. So I do believe that there's greener days ahead, and I ask that we all abide by, and move forward together so that we can do right by our clients and each other.
All right, I have a headache, but we will be back right after these messages with my thoughts for the week. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you hear a lot about how crucial it is to have the right partners in this industry. At Roadway, we don't just move your clients, we give them an experience they'll love. Specialized services to our white glove treatment, it's all about making sure your clients feel taken care of every step of the way. And if you're looking for a rewarding referral program, reach out to me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or Visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back with my closing thoughts for this week. So, the need for affordable housing in New York City has never been more pressing. The city's population is steadily growing, housing costs have skyrocketed, placing significant financial strain on residents across income levels. For low and middle income households, the lack of affordable options often results in overcrowded living conditions, longer commutes, or displacement to areas far from their jobs, schools, and communities. The affordable housing crisis exacerbates inequality, forcing many to choose between basic necessities and shelter. Addressing this issue requires robust public policies, increased funding for affordable developments, and partnerships with private developers to ensure equitable access to housing. Providing affordable housing not only fosters economic stability for individuals and families, but also strengthens the social fabric of the city, ensuring it remains a vibrant and diverse place to live and work. Recent news from the current administration in New York City about the City of Yes is tragic. But what else is new? Except it is time for a brand new administration, period. And that's our broadcast for today. Thanks to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky Now, or TikTok at Vince Rocco, or my website, thinkvince.com. And Oprah Winfrey says, if you look at what you have in life, you'll always have more. But if you look at what you don't have in life, you'll never have enough. And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you across the globe, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am grateful, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.